Hello and welcome to Everyday Linux User. In today's video I am looking at the Raspberry Pi 5 as a desktop PC. Now there's lots of videos out there showing the Raspberry Pi doing all sorts of fancy things. You can use it for robotics, you can use it for electronics, and a lot of people use it for retro gaming. You can use it as a Nextcloud device for making your own home cloud. There's all sorts of ways you can use the Raspberry Pi. But what I want to look at is the Raspberry Pi 5 viable? And I'm talking about the Raspberry Pi 5 because it's the most up-to-date one and it's got the most memory available to it and the highest specs. Is it suitable as a desktop operating system? And so I've got rid of Raspberry Pi OS for this video because I don't think Raspberry Pi OS is something that your average, ordinary, everyday user wants to use as their desktop operating system. It is just far too basic. So I've installed Ubuntu and I'm going to try different distributions out on this Raspberry Pi 5 to see which one works best. And I've tried MX Linux in the past and it worked very well. But today I'm trying Ubuntu. I'm going to show you what I've got so you can see the cost of it, and then you can compare it against a budget mini PC, or you can compare it against a second-hand computer and see whether the Raspberry Pi 5 is or isn't a good thing. So let's first go to Firefox, and I'm on the Pi Hut, which is a good sort of like UK website or a good website for buying Raspberry Pi products, and it gives you a gauge of how much things should cost. So let's go for the Raspberry Pi to start off with. And I'm recording this on a Raspberry Pi. So you can buy the Raspberry Pi starter kit from £82. And that gives you, so if we have a look at this, that gives you a case, it gives you a Raspberry Pi, gives you a power supply, gives you a USB drive, and gives you an HDMI cable. But that's only the 2GB version. Now that's not viable. Now the 16GB version, by all accounts, is you don't get the benefit of the 16 gig. So I think the sweet point, and this is the device I'm using today, is the 8GB version, and you see that comes in at £111 just for this kit here. The problem with this is that it runs off the SD card, and the SD card makes it run slow. So what you really want to use is a NVMe drive or an M2 drive or something like that. So let's have a look at an NVMe hat. So you can get that one, and that's £11.50, or you can get a Pi 5 case with the NVMe put in, and that's £17.40, and there's different setups. Now that doesn't actually give you the NVMe drive itself, it just gives you the hat that connects to the Raspberry Pi. So the actual storage you're going to have to buy separately, and you can get a decent amount for about £20-25. So you can see we're already at, getting towards the £130, £140 mark. But obviously if you're going to buy your own case here, there's no point buying the starter kit. So if we just go for a Raspberry Pi 5, so the 4GB version is £57 and the 8GB version is £76. So if you add your £76 to say the £27 with the NVMe drive, that gets you over the £100 mark. You will probably still need a SD card to flash in the first place, or a USB drive works as well. You can use the power supply, which is £11.40, so it's 120-ish pounds. And then you'll still need a HDMI cable. Now you can get those off Amazon. It's not a specific one. £3 for a mini HDMI cable, which is what you need. And then a keyboard and mouse is £7.50. So let's say £130 all in, something around that mark. I'm not going to do a complete sort of like sum up on that. So that's kind of your base of how much you're spending. So I've installed Ubuntu onto the NVMe drive on the Raspberry Pi, and I've set it all up. I'll show a picture of my setup in a minute. And basically I've got an electro cookie case, I've got the Raspberry Pi with an NVMe hat, and plugged into it I've got my power supply, my HDMI cable, I've got the wire for my microphone, and I've got a little USB dongle for my mouse and keyboard. Now, to set up the case took me about 20 minutes. It didn't come all packaged up. You have to put it together, and there's instructions, and they were quite clear. But if you just want something to pick up and start working, and it all be ready for you in the first place, then this isn't a viable option for you. And there's a fiddly bit where you have to plug the NVMe into the Raspberry Pi using a very short cable, and that was a bit fiddly, especially if you've got larger fingers than I have. Luckily I've got quite small fingers, therefore it was it was okay. So with the Raspberry Pi set up, installing Ubuntu onto the NVMe drive wasn't completely straightforward. What I had to do is I put in a SD card, and I did this on another computer. I put the SD card into an SD card reader on another computer. I downloaded Raspberry Pi OS onto the SD card. I booted the Raspberry Pi from the SD card, and then I ran the Raspberry Pi imaging tool. I'm going to link the video that I've got for this in the description, and I chose my USB drive, I chose Ubuntu, and I went for the long-term support release, and that's kind of important because I found the latest version didn't work very well. So the 2404 release that I'm looking at here, and I put that onto the NVMe drive, and this is what I've booted into. So at which point the SD card is reusable for something else if you want to use it for something else. So that's what I've done, and that's how I set it up. And here we are at the Ubuntu desktop. So this isn't a how to set up the Raspberry Pi and how to install Ubuntu onto the Raspberry Pi. This is how viable is Ubuntu and the Raspberry Pi 5 as a desktop system. So that's what I've set up here. I've got Ubuntu, and you can see I'm recording the video, and if I use the menu, it is working quite well. Now I have to say that I have switched from Wayland back to Xorg because Wayland really slowed this thing down. Now that could be a problem in a few years time because Ubuntu is going to move away from Xorg and it's not going to work with Xorg anymore. So they need to improve the ARM-based version of Ubuntu because this one isn't very good with Wayland on the Raspberry Pi. The other thing to mention therefore is because the Raspberry Pi is ARM-based, not every piece of software is going to work on the Raspberry Pi. So whilst the Raspberry Pi is considered a cheap alternative, and it's quite powerful really for its size, it's not as cost effective as maybe people would think, and you can get cheap mini PCs that are 64-bit x86 based that actually run things like Windows and that very well with and certainly would run Ubuntu as well as the Raspberry Pi. And I can testify to that because I've got a mini PC that I use that is about the same price as setting up this Raspberry Pi, and it has none of the hassle because it's just a box and you just plug it in. But here we are, this is Ubuntu. Let's stop waffling and let's have a look at it. So the menu system is quite good. It works just like Ubuntu does. You can see I've installed OBS Studio, but that doesn't work. To get the video player working, I had to go into the terminal and I had to run the install Ubuntu restricted extras, and that's not new, that's also part of Ubuntu anyway, but that makes the video player play all videos. You've seen Firefox working. If we go into Firefox now, and we can go to my YouTube channel. And you can see I've got a video here how to boot a Raspberry Pi. Welcome to Everyday Linux User. In today's video I'm going to show you how to install Raspberry Pi OS onto an SSD so that you can boot the Raspberry Pi from the SSD. And the So you can see that worked quite well, and we've got all these other videos about the Raspberry Pi as well. So let's close that down. So let's go into online accounts. And I've got Nextcloud, and my Nextcloud is actually a Raspberry Pi running Nextcloud. So you can see that there. So down here you'll see I've now got another drive. I can click here, and you can see these are the files on my Nextcloud device. So what I could do is I could run something like Rhythmbox, and it's going to import from my music library on this machine. Now I can either change it to point to the Nextcloud, which could be quite slow, so let's give it a go, or we can use the music folder. So let's try Nextcloud first, and as suspected it's going to take quite some time to do it like that. So I'm going to put that to music, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a couple of albums from here. I'll paste that in. Now obviously you could just copy your music off of a USB drive or download it wherever you've got it. If you have music still in this fashion, I know in this day and age people use things like Spotify or Amazon Music and things like that, but if you have got a local music collection, this works. And you can see that's pulled it in the Blind Melon. Now I'm going to play a couple of seconds of this because I don't want it copyrighted. And there we go, that's that playing. So Rhythmbox would work. You can see we've got LibreOffice on the machine. LibreOffice, it's only got writer on the panel, but you could find the rest of it. And if you wanted calc on the desktop, you could pin to dash as well if you want, like that. And you can drag these around. It works. Let's have a look at the performance of it. Now remember, I'm using Xorg, so it's actually working quite well. And you can see it is actually reasonably responsive. So now I've got it installed, it's actually working quite well. And we'll write a letter. As you see, it's performing quite well. I typed all that real time, so you can see that that worked. I'm not going to save it. If you want to install more applications, you've got the App Center. As I said before, not every app that you're ever going to want or need is going to be in here because this is ARM based, but you can still get most things. That doesn't seem very official to me. I think if I was using Spotify, I'd probably go onto the internet and do it straight from the browser. I don't like using apps that you have to log into, so I don't want to log into my Spotify account on an unverified app. That doesn't seem very secure. It's okay if there's an official Spotify app or something semi-official, but there's too many. Even if the person who's written the software has the best intentions, they might leave security holes. I just don't want that. And you see, it wouldn't let you play Spotify in the browser like that. Plan B, let's try and install another browser. So getting Spotify to playback, it involves installing. You're either going to want Chrome because Chrome is going to have the library built into it, or you're going to need to install something like Widevine to get the DRM to work within Firefox or within Chromium for that to work. It's fiddly. So I'm sure there's a way of doing it, and if I look into it, I'm sure I could get it going. But for the everyday Linux user, that's not a good starting point. Trying to play Spotify is restrictive. Now, research on the internet shows there are some guides out there saying that you can install Chrome onto the Raspberry Pi, but they're very, very technical in nature and they're a little bit hacky. So, whilst it's possible, I'm not sure I would trust it. For the everyday Linux user wanting to use the Raspberry Pi as a desktop PC, is it viable? Probably not. Now, there is a tool you can install called PiApps. And these are the instructions to install it. And so we're going to try this out because this will give you more software. And it's another software center that you can install. So we copy this. We're going to open a terminal. We're just going to paste the commands in. It's as simple as running that one command in the terminal, except it didn't do anything. Sudo it, just in case. So that should be it complete. I'll close this and this. So let's see what we've got here. So under Multimedia, you've got Audacious, Kdenlive, which I'll be using to make this video shortly. OBS Studio I've already installed anyway. It didn't work very well, so hopefully that one would. But these are the apps available. You can see there's no Spotify there. Right, you can see you can install Minecraft. So I tried this for my son actually. The Minecraft Pi works very well. And you can see Steam is here, so you can install Steam. How well it's going to work is probably not very well at all. So these are the choice of web browsers. You can see there's no Microsoft Edge and there's no Chrome. It's just different versions of different browsers. So I think we can safely say from that there's no obvious way of installing Chrome or Edge, and therefore it's going to be difficult to get something like Spotify working. Now I let PiApps run to finish installing Steam, and we now have a Steam icon, so let's click that, see what happens. Whilst that's doing that, let's look at some of the support. Now I've got Bluetooth enabled and that works. You can see it's connected to my Bluetooth speaker. Got Wi-Fi enabled, that's connected, and if I click here, you see it's got my network, and if I click there, it's going to show me all the networks available, and there you go. And whilst we're here, let's go down to printing, and you see it's found my printer okay. So hardware is actually very good. The support works very well, so shouldn't have too many problems. I am going to point out that sometimes when I've got HDMI switch because I've got different PCs connected. Sometimes when you turn on the Raspberry Pi, trying to get it to go to the screen when it's on the switch is a little bit tricky. It doesn't seem to just come to life straight away, and sometimes you have to pull out the HDMI cable and plug it back in to get it to come to life. Don't know what that's all about, but if you've just got this as your only device connected to a PC, it should be fine. So if it's just connected, if it's just connected to a monitor, then it should be fine. You see there's a bit of flickering going on. I'm not sure why. Yeah, you see it does flicker a little bit. But as a standard PC, like if you just wanted to use it for writing letters, doing spreadsheets, searching the internet, then it should work okay for you. You can watch YouTube and do things like that. So it does work. Is it a viable desktop operating system? Is it a viable desktop PC? If you've got a Raspberry Pi 5 and you've got the case and everything, then yes, you can use it as a desktop PC. Would I go out and buy a Raspberry Pi 5 to dedicate it as a desktop PC? I'm not sure about that, because there are other devices out there of a similar price range that would work straight away, and you could install x86 based operating systems, or but you know, you can install things like Chrome on Ubuntu. You can have any operating system, Fedora, and every app's gonna work on it. Whereas the Raspberry Pi, because it's ARM based, there are hoops that you have to jump through, and we have to remember what the Raspberry Pi was built for in the first place. Was it built to be a desktop PC? No. Was it built to be a gaming PC? No. It does a hell of a lot for its size. Now just waiting for Steam to come to life. I've just logged in, so it's going to pop up any minute now. Not quite sure what it's doing at this moment in time. Just trying to get it to go to my library. Realistically, Steam probably isn't going to be that great. I mean, we could install something like Cave Crawler or the Jeffrey game or something like that, and it's going to work. So that's installed. So I'll close Steam down, and you should be able to click it from here. I think I should have just hit the play button. And this is why I prefer console gaming. Console gaming, it loads a game quite quickly, and there's no faffing around. I'm not serious enough as a gamer to want to use a computer. Now obviously the Raspberry Pi isn't the computer you use if you're a serious gamer. You're not going to be playing Fortnite or any of the AAA games on a Raspberry Pi. It might be that I haven't got Proton enabled. Is that what the problem is here? It says it's enabled for all titles, so it should work. But we're not getting anything, are we? Right, I'm going to leave that there. Right, it's time to sum up. This video is on long enough. So the Raspberry Pi as a desktop PC, I think I've mentioned before, it's not as cheap as it would seem. Okay, so the actual device itself, for 8GB of RAM, it's got a little small GPU in it. It is £78. Now if you've got the keyboard, mouse, you've got HDMI cable, and you've got SD cards already, if you've got a spare NVMe drive already, that's fine. But you're still going to need the case, which comes with a fan. You're still going to need the NVMe. You're still going to need the hat to install the NVMe drive, and then you've got to get the operating system on the device in the first place. And if you want it on the NVMe drive, it's a two-step process to get it on there, so it's not completely straightforward. So is it viable as a desktop PC? You can see once I've got the desktop operating system on it, a lot of things do work, but not everything works. And I think you can get a cheap mini PC that will do what you want better. But if you've already got a Raspberry Pi lying around, and you've already got the case, you've already got all the stuff, then if you need to use it as a desktop PC, maybe you're short of cash or whatever, and it's the only thing you've got available, then it is viable. And the thing I haven't touched, like if you want to do software development or something like that, then you can install IDEs and stuff. And you can see Steam is struggling to do stuff in the background whilst I'm doing this. But that really is the end of the video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned, because I'm going to do another video about a different operating system on the Raspberry Pi coming up shortly. This is Ubuntu. Ubuntu's not the lightest of operating systems, so I'm going to compare it with maybe one of the other mainstream ones. I don't know if there's a Fedora based Raspberry Pi operating system, but we'll check it out and we'll see. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.